Hey everyone, before we dive into this story, please hit that subscribe button to join our channel for more gripping tales. I stood in the grand ballroom, heart pounding, as Mr. Harrington's voice echoed. "No maid will ever marry my son," he declared. His words cut through the crowd, sharp and cold, aimed at me. I was just a maid, invisible to the elite, yet here I was, in love with his son Edward. The chandeliers gleamed above, casting light on my worn dress. I felt every eye on me, judging, mocking my audacity to dream. Edward's face flushed red, torn between duty and love. I clenched my fists, refusing to crumble under their stares. This was my moment to prove them wrong, to show my worth. The music began, a soft waltz, pulling me forward. I took a deep breath, ready to change their minds. Tonight I'd make them see me, not as a maid, but as a woman. The crowd parted as I stepped onto the polished floor, my heart racing. Mr. Harrington's sneer followed me, his words still ringing. I wasn't here to beg. I was here to dance. Edward hesitated, then offered his hand, his eyes full of trust. The waltz's rhythm wrapped around us, steady and sure. I'd practiced in secret, every night after chores, in the dim servants' quarters. My steps were precise, each one a defiance of their scorn. Whispers rippled through the guests, but I ignored them. I moved with grace, my worn shoes gliding effortlessly. Edward smiled, his confidence growing with mine. I wasn't just a maid tonight, I was his partner. The room began to blur as we spun, lost in the music. Mr. Harrington stood rigid, his face a mask of disbelief. He'd underestimated me, thinking I'd falter. But I knew this dance, every turn, every step, by heart. My mother, a dancer before hardship claimed her, taught me well. Each movement was a tribute to her, a rebellion against my station. The crowd's murmurs softened, replaced by gasps of surprise. Edward's hand tightened on mine, his pride evident. I felt powerful, no longer invisible, no longer small. The waltz carried us, our steps perfectly in sync. I caught Mr. Harrington's eye, his sneer fading. This was my answer to his cruel words. I wasn't just dancing, I was rewriting my story. The music swelled, and I let it guide me, my confidence soaring. Every spin was a statement, every step a challenge. The elite watched, their judgment turning to awe. I wasn't trained in their fancy schools, but I had passion. My dress, patched and plain, flowed like silk in my mind. Edward's gaze never left me, his smile my anchor. I could feel the room shifting, their doubts unraveling. Mr. Harrington's voice had silenced the crowd, but my dance spoke louder. I twirled, my heart light, my fears gone. This was more than a waltz, it was my fight. I was proving I belonged, not just to Edward, but to myself. The chandeliers sparkled above, reflecting my resolve in their light. I moved with purpose, each step deliberate, each turn bold. The crowd's whispers turned to murmurs of admiration. Edward and I were one, our movements fluid, our connection undeniable. Mr. Harrington's face twitched, his confidence cracking. He'd called me a maid, but I was dancing like a queen. My mother's lessons echoed in every gesture, her strength in me. I wasn't here to please them, I was here to be seen. The music pulsed, and I matched its rhythm, fearless. This dance was my rebellion, my heart laid bare. I'd make them all remember this night. The waltz reached its peak, the violins soaring, my heart with them. Edward spun me, and I felt like I could fly. The crowd was no longer a threat, just a blur of faces. My focus was on the music, on Edward, on this moment. Mr. Harrington's words tried to cage me, but I was free. Each step was a victory, each turn a triumph over doubt. I caught glimpses of the guests, their eyes wide, captivated. I wasn't just a maid, I was a force undeniable. Edward's hand was steady, his trust my strength. The room spun, but I was grounded, alive. This dance was my truth, and I owned it. The music slowed, but my energy didn't waver, my steps still sure. I could feel Mr. Harrington's gaze, heavy but faltering. He'd thought he could shame me, but I was unshamed. The crowd's silence was now respect, their judgment undone. Edward's smile grew, his love a shield against their scorn. My patched dress felt like a gown, my heart like a crown. I moved with elegance, defying every expectation. The waltz was my stage, and I was the star. I didn't need their approval, but I'd earned it. This was my moment, and I claimed it fully. The music carried me, but my will drove me. As we spun, I saw Mrs. Harrington, her eyes softening, almost kind. Even she couldn't deny the beauty of our dance. Edward's hand in mine felt like a promise, unbreakable. The crowd's murmurs were now applause, soft but growing. I'd turned their pity into wonder, their scorn into awe. Mr. Harrington stood frozen, his words lost in my grace. My mother's spirit danced with me, her lessons my guide. Each step was a declaration. I was enough. The waltz was my weapon, my heart its power. I wasn't just dancing, I was rewriting their rules. The room belonged to me now. The final notes approached, and I poured everything into them. Every pain, every dream, every hope fueled my steps. Edward and I moved as one, our connection a beacon. The crowd was entranced, their doubts swept away. Mr. Harrington's face was pale, his arrogance crumbling. I wasn't the maid he'd mocked. I was a woman he'd underestimated. My steps were flawless, my heart unstoppable. The music built to a crescendo, and so did I. This dance wasn't just for Edward, it was for me. I was proving my worth, not to them, but to myself. The waltz was my victory, my heart's song. The music paused, and we stopped, breathless, in the center. The silence was heavy, then broken by thunderous applause. I stood tall, Edward's hand still in mine, our bond unshaken. Mr. Harrington's mouth opened, but no words came. He'd stumbled over his own cruelty, silenced by my grace. The crowd cheered, their admiration now undeniable. I wasn't just a maid, I was a revelation. My patched dress glowed in the chandelier light. Edward's eyes shone with pride, his love my reward. This moment was mine, earned through every step. The waltz had changed everything, and I stood victorious. The applause faded, but the energy lingered, electric in the air. I felt every eye on me, no longer judging but marveling. Mr. Harrington's face was a storm, his pride wounded. I'd taken his words and turned them to dust. Edward squeezed my hand, his smile brighter than ever. The crowd's cheers were for us, for our defiance. I stood taller, my heart swelling with triumph. The ballroom, once a cage, was now my stage. My mother's lessons had carried me here, to this moment. I wasn't invisible anymore. I was unforgettable. The waltz had rewritten my place in their world. Edward led me off the floor, the crowd still buzzing with awe. Whispers followed us, but they were different now, admiring. Mr. Harrington stood alone, his authority shaken. I'd shown them all that grace wasn't born of wealth. My steps had spoken louder than his cruel words. Edward's gaze was warm, his pride in me unshakable. I felt like I'd conquered a mountain, my heart soaring. The music still echoed in my mind, a reminder of my strength. I wasn't just a maid, I was a force of will. This night would be etched in their memories forever. I'd made sure of it. We paused by the grand staircase, the crowd still watching. Mrs. Harrington approached, her expression softer than before. "You dance beautifully," she said, her voice low. I nodded, polite but unyielding, my confidence intact. Mr. Harrington lingered behind, his silence deafening. He'd tried to break me, but I'd broken his resolve. Edward's arm around me felt like home, safe and true. The ballroom's opulence no longer intimidated me. I belonged here, not as a servant, but as myself. The waltz had been my rebellion, my victory. I'd shown them who I really was. The guests began to mingle again, but their eyes kept drifting to me. I wasn't invisible anymore. I was the story of the night. Edward whispered, "You were incredible," his voice full of love. I smiled, feeling the weight of my triumph settle in. Mr. Harrington's words had meant to crush me, but they'd failed. My dance had turned his scorn into silence, his pride into shame. The crowd's admiration was a quiet roar in my ears. I'd earned this moment, not with wealth, but with heart. The waltz had been my voice, loud and clear. I was no longer just a maid. A young woman approached, her gown glittering, her eyes kind. "Where did you learn to dance like that?" she asked. I smiled, thinking of my mother, her lessons in our tiny room. "From someone who believed in me," I replied simply. Her nod was respectful, a small victory in itself. Edward stood by me, his presence a steady anchor. The ballroom felt different now, less hostile, more mine. Mr. Harrington's silence was louder than his earlier words. I'd proven him wrong, not with anger, but with grace. The waltz had been my rebellion, my truth. I stood proud, my heart full. The night continued, but the air had changed, lighter, warmer. Guests smiled at me, their judgment replaced by curiosity. Edward and I shared a quiet moment by the balcony. The stars above felt like witnesses to my triumph. Mr. Harrington's voice no longer echoed in my mind. I'd silenced it with every step, every turn of the waltz. My patched dress felt like armor, my heart like fire. I wasn't here to fit their mold. I was here to break it. The crowd's applause still rang in my ears. This was my night, my victory, my story. I'd rewritten their rules with my dance. Edward's hand found mine, his touch grounding me in the moment. "You changed everything tonight," he said softly. I nodded, knowing it was true, feeling the shift inside me. The ballroom, once a place of fear, was now my triumph. Mr. Harrington's words had been a challenge, and I'd met it. My mother's spirit had guided my steps, her love my strength. The guests' whispers were now stories of my dance. I wasn't just a maid. I was a woman who'd claimed her place. The waltz had been my weapon, my heart its power. I stood taller, ready for whatever came next. The music started again, another waltz, but I stayed still. I didn't need to dance again. I'd already made my point. The crowd's eyes followed me, their respect hard-earned. Mr. Harrington stood by the fireplace, his face unreadable. I didn't care what he thought now. I'd won. Edward's love was my anchor, his faith in me unshaken. My patched dress was a badge of honor, not shame. The ballroom was no longer their domain. It was mine too. My mother's lessons had carried me here. The waltz had been my rebellion, my victory. I was no longer invisible. I was seen. A gentleman approached, offering a nod of respect, not pity. "That was extraordinary," he said, his voice genuine. I thanked him, my heart steady, my pride intact. Edward's smile was my reward, his love my strength. The night felt alive, every moment a testament to my courage. Mr. Harrington's words had tried to define me, but I'd redefined myself. The crowd's admiration was a quiet hum around me. My dance had spoken louder than their doubts. I stood in the ballroom, no longer a maid, but a woman. The waltz had been my voice, my heart's song. The evening wore on, but my energy didn't fade, my resolve strong. I caught Mr. Harrington's eye, his expression conflicted. He'd tried to shame me, but I'd shamed his prejudice. The guests' murmurs were now stories of my triumph. Edward and I stood together, a united front. My mother's lessons had built this moment, her love my guide. The ballroom's grandeur no longer daunted me. I'd claimed my place, not with wealth, but with grace. The waltz had been my rebellion, my victory. I was no longer just a maid. I was unforgettable. The crowd began to thin, but their whispers lingered, full of awe. Edward and I stepped onto the balcony, the night air cool. His hand in mine felt like a vow, unspoken but real. Mr. Harrington's words had tried to break us, but we'd stood firm. My dance had turned his scorn into silence, his pride into doubt. The stars above seemed to cheer for me, for my courage. I wasn't just a maid. I was a woman who'd fought and won. The waltz had been my weapon, my heart its strength. The ballroom was no longer a cage. It was mine. I'd rewritten my story with every step. Edward looked at me, his eyes full of love and pride. "You were unstoppable," he said, his voice warm. I smiled, feeling the weight of the night settle in my heart. Mr. Harrington's silence was my victory, his words undone. The crowd's applause still echoed, a reminder of my strength. My patched dress felt like a crown, my steps like a throne. I danced not just for Edward, but for myself. The waltz had been my rebellion, my truth laid bare. The ballroom was no longer their world, it was ours. I stood proud, my heart soaring. We returned to the ballroom, the music softer now, the mood lighter. Guests nodded at me, their respect clear in their eyes. Mr. Harrington stood alone, his authority diminished. I'd taken his words and turned them into my triumph. My mother's lessons had guided me, her spirit in every step. The crowd's whispers were now tales of my dance. I wasn't just a maid, I was a woman who'd changed the night. The waltz had been my voice, my heart's song. Edward's hand in mine was my anchor, my home. I'd claimed my place, and no one could take it. A young girl in a fine dress approached, her eyes wide with wonder. "Will you teach me to dance like that?" she asked. I smiled, thinking of my mother, her lessons in our small room. "With heart, anyone can," I told her softly. Edward's grin was proud, his love unwavering. The ballroom felt warm, no longer cold or distant. Mr. Harrington's words had lost their power over me. My dance had spoken louder, my grace undeniable. The waltz had been my rebellion, my victory. I stood tall, ready to inspire others. The night grew late, but the energy of my triumph lingered. Guests still glanced at me, their curiosity now admiration. Edward and I shared a quiet laugh, our bond stronger. Mr. Harrington's silence was a confession of his defeat. My patched dress was no longer a mark of shame, but pride. The ballroom's chandeliers glowed, reflecting my resolve. I danced not to prove them wrong, but to prove myself right. The waltz had been my weapon, my heart its power. My mother's spirit had carried me here. I was no longer invisible. I was a star. As we moved through the crowd, their smiles felt like victories. Edward's hand was steady, his love my greatest reward. Mr. Harrington stood by the door, his face unreadable. I didn't need his approval. I'd earned my own. The night had been mine, every step a testament to my strength. The waltz had rewritten my story, my place in their world. My mother's lessons were my foundation, her love my guide. The crowd's whispers were now legends of my dance. I wasn't just a maid, I was a woman who'd won. The ballroom was mine, and I stood proud. The final guests began to leave, but their eyes lingered on me. Edward and I stood by the grand staircase, united. Mr. Harrington's words had tried to define me, but I defined myself. My dance had turned his scorn into silence, his pride into shame. The ballroom felt like home, its opulence no longer daunting. My patched dress was a symbol of my journey, my strength. The waltz had been my rebellion, my heart's song. I'd proven I belonged, not just to Edward, but to myself. The night was mine, and I'd never forget it. Edward leaned close, his voice soft. "You changed everything." I nodded, feeling the truth of his words in my heart. The crowd's applause still echoed, a reminder of my courage. Mr. Harrington's silence was louder than his cruel words. My mother's spirit had danced with me, her lessons my guide. The ballroom was no longer their domain, it was ours. I'd claimed my place with every step, every turn. The waltz had been my victory, my truth laid bare. I stood tall, my heart full, my future bright. The chandeliers dimmed, but my resolve burned brighter than ever. Guests waved goodbye, their respect clear in their smiles. Mr. Harrington left without a word, his defeat complete. I'd turned his scorn into my triumph, his words into dust. Edward's love was my anchor, his pride my reward. The ballroom, once a place of fear, was now my stage. My patched dress felt like a gown, my heart like a crown. The waltz had been my rebellion, my victory. I was no longer just a maid, I was unforgettable. As we stepped into the night, the stars seemed to shine for me. Edward's hand in mine felt like a promise, unbreakable. Mr. Harrington's words were gone, erased by my dance. The ballroom was behind us, but its memory was mine. My mother's lessons had carried me, her love my strength. The waltz had been my voice, my heart's song. I'd proven my worth, not to them, but to myself. The night was over, but my story was just beginning. I was no longer invisible, I was a woman who'd won. The world would remember my dance. If you loved this story, please subscribe to our channel for more tales of triumph and heart.